Thank you. Well, let's talk to Jehangir Malik, the Chief Executive of Muslim Aid, who's in our central London studio. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
What can you tell us about, obviously we've seen our own images from yesterday, but what can you tell us about what you and Muslim Aid are seeing on the ground there?
The situation unfolding for the last 2 months since August 25th has been catastrophic. We have a human tragedy of unprecedented proportions that is unfolding in front of our very eyes. I was in Rakhine State myself recently in an aid distribution, one of the very few aid agencies that's operating on the ground inside Myanmar in Rakhine State, and under very difficult circumstances delivering humanitarian aid which is desperately needed at this moment in time. I think there's a twin track approach here. One which is the political dimension that we welcomed Theresa May's speech that came last night as a renewed sense of urgency on the images that we've been witnessing for the last 2 to 3 months. Our teams on the ground delivering humanitarian aid and assistance under very difficult circumstances, and much more needs to be done.
Is part of the issue here Aung San Suu Kyi herself, in the fact that she's been fated by the international community for many decades because of the house arrest that she was under for such a long time? She's such a renowned and was such a well-respected figure. Has that, by its very nature, delayed our reaction to this?
I think that the Aung San Suu Kyi situation is that, of course, she was held up as a beacon of light of democracy, and we as humanitarian aid agencies are responding to a disastrous situation need to ensure that primarily that we get the humanitarian access that's needed to ensure that all of the democratic institutions and rights of people of Rohingya are met. Their sanctity of life, their basic human rights are met. And this is what we look forward to, and this is what we call for, a protection of the situation of the people inside of Rohingya, and we expect the authorities and all governments and the international community to do all that they can to ensure that is in place.
Well, that's easier said than done, though, isn't
Absolutely.
it? I mean, so what would be the priorities then for the international community? What can they do directly to act now?
And we have to sort of split this, I believe, into 2 stages. One is the international pressure, as highlighted by Theresa May last night, to muster up all the weight that they can to get behind the international community to put that level of pressure onto Myanmar to ensure that there is that the situation is resolved, that there is an end to the crisis. I believe that the commission, the Rohingya commission that was in place before the August 25th, led by Kofi Annan, and the situation now with the humanitarian crisis is that we need humanitarian access. We've got aid assistance and humanitarian aid workers that are in situ at this moment in time, and they need the desperately needed access to be able to reach these people who are living in a perilous condition.
We often hear when we respond and report on crises of a similar nature, that often you end up reaching a tipping point where you end up losing a generation or a community is irrevocably damaged. Has that happened with the Rohingya yet?
I fear that's the case, because the community that I had been in touch with and come into contact with, you've seen hundreds of thousands fleeing into Bangladesh, and Bangladesh has to be commended on its approach in welcoming and receiving over almost 1 million refugees that have turned up on its doorstep in a very short period of time. And we've seen children that are having to take this arduous journey right across inside Myanmar and across the border. So we need as much support as we can get to the people of Rohingya, especially the children and the women and the elderly. We cannot witness this tragedy unfolding night after night, evening after evening, day after day. We must ensure that the necessary action is taken for to grant humanitarian aid agencies like Muslim Aid the necessary access to reach more people in some of the most difficult and desperate situations.
Jehangir Malik from Muslim Aid, thank you. Appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.